Okay, so today we are going to be talking about, or for the next couple of sessions, we're going to be talking about ELA assessments, English Language Arts assessments, and separating that from the past couple of weeks talking about reading assessments. So when we look at ELA in both regular ed and special ed, what we're really talking about here, what I'm focusing on for the sake of this class, is going to be on writing components of ELA, not necessarily speaking, listening, and language components. All right. So we're going to be talking about spelling. We're going to be talking about grammar. We're going to be talking about writing. Thursday and into next week, we'll be having some conversations about how to look at I took it off here because I was going to put it on for Thursday. How we look at writing and ELA as content versus concept in other classes, right? So how do we assess ELA as a skill in and of itself, like in an ELA type class, versus how do we consider the components of ELA in a science class, in a social studies class, in a non-English language class itself, all right? Especially when it comes to our secondary grades, that discrepancy or that issue is something that thoroughly needs to be addressed. And honestly, at the college level, it needs to be addressed just as much. How many of you have taken a math class where you've had to write, or a science class where you've had to write? My first semester at the university, there was a massive university-wide push to increase writing skills among our freshman classes overall. So we recognize this problem at the elementary level, but we don't necessarily have to deal with it. It creates a problem at the secondary level that compounds at the college level. And then we have not illiterate people going out into the workforce, but we have people with weaker writing skills who are graduating from colleges across the country into not just a workforce, but into an adult life that becomes more and more and more dependent on writing skills and writing as communication. I could go off on a diatribe there, but just think about all the levels of expression that you communicate in writing now as adults: text, email, Twitter, Facebook, that we're not taught, right? How many of you have misinterpreted something that was written in a text or an email or written online, right? Absolutely. And that is a product of not having a means to teach effective writing skills at the younger age, all right? That seems like a pretty big jump, but our focus, as we're going to see, turns into writing style, not writing function, right? How many of you could write a little fiction story? Probably. When's the last time in your adult life that you wrote a little fiction story? Never. How many of you can effectively communicate disappointment or anger or sadness or happiness through writing? That's much more challenging, right? And that's not a skill that's necessarily taught. Anyway, the point is, writing as content is something that we do a decent job with, but writing as kind of this underlying process that is applicable throughout, we don't do a good job with overall. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. All right. So for today, we're going to focus on the formative and summative side of spelling assessment, spelling and grammar assessments, which are primarily going to be at the elementary through middle school grades. and then we're going to start into writing assessments. We're going to focus today on writing CBMs, or curriculum-based measurements, as both a formative and summative assessment. And I actually have a couple of prompts that I'm going to open up to you guys to actually do today, so that we can take a look at scoring them and what that looks like. And then on Thursday, we're going to come back to writing and take a much more in-depth look at rubrics. All right. Okay, so spelling, all right, yeah. Spelling and grammar as formative assessment. This seems like it should be about as straightforward as it gets, right? At a basic level, that is true. You teach a specific set of words, you test a specific set of words, and you're done, right? There is value in that, but that is not going to be the only thing that we want to do. We're also going to look at this idea of, or another way to assess spelling and grammar is through this idea of word families, all right? That's a little bit more broad, a little bit more, has a little bit more generalization, is less specific, has a lot broader purpose. And then we also have definitions and context. Each of these components of spelling and grammar are necessary to look at and necessary to assess, but they have to be used in the right way, all right? So if we are focusing on some sight words, we don't want this word family idea. Most of our sight words are going to be words that don't fall into word families, as we'll see, and vice versa. But we can't just teach sight words or just teach word families. We have to have both of those. By the same token, we can't just teach spelling. That's not going to get any of us very far in the bigger picture of ELA and reading. We have to make sure that we are working with definitions, we're working with context, we're working with meaning, we're working with how to break apart words to identify their meaning in a functional way. All right. So starting with specific words and specifically sight words, for our younger grades, this primarily comes from what are called the Dolch word lists. Anyone heard of Dolch words before? No? All right. Dolch words are, if you just Google it, you'll get a list that's either exactly like this or very, very similar. And these are some of the highest frequency words that you find in early readers in the English language, all right? By learning these words as either sight words or spelling words, you will be able to read almost all early pre-primer and primer stories. So these are, or at least words that are not attached to nouns and pictures, right? So these are the first words that children are going to learn that are not necessarily attached to a specific object, all right? When it comes to teaching, whether it's Dolch words or any other sight words, when it comes to teaching these lists, very, very simple. Your assessment and your instruction have massive overlap, right? Pick your 10, 20 words for the week, test them, teach them, test them. Your formative assessment, if we look at that structure as both formative and summative, right? It's formative in that maybe we break this list up into 10 weeks, right? And then each 5 or 10 words, whatever we're looking at, is our formative assessment to the full list. On a bigger structure, or sorry, a smaller level, the summative is the list. The formative becomes our moment to moment. So if I am teaching a list of 10 words, maybe one way that I'm going to do that, I'll give the assessment, the summative to the list assessment, and my formative becomes, I'm just going to every day give you a a quick list, right? Spell this, spell this, spell this, spell this. You spell it, I give you feedback, right or wrong, plus or minus, right? And that formative assessment can be, which of these did you get right? Don't need to practice those. Which of these did you get wrong? Need to practice those. So that's that moment-to-moment decision making that is going to allow us to make really easy decisions for something like this, right? So what's easy about spelling words, especially when it comes to sight words, it's black or white. You either know it or you don't. There's almost no analysis that's going to go along with that. We don't have to worry about families. We don't have to worry about concepts. We don't have to worry about meaning. It's just, can you spell it? Period. Okay. When you get to older grades, the sight words, the specific words are no longer in this Dolch list, because you can, you should have the structure to be able to spell most of these types of words. But what do specific word lists turn into at older ages? I didn't ask that particularly well. 4th grade, 5th grade, especially middle school, and really especially high school, if you are teaching spelling in any capacity, what are those spelling words going to be related to?
Probably other lessons, like whatever you learn in history class.
Perfect, exactly. It's going to be vocab for whatever target you are teaching, all right? At that point, the purpose of the spelling word is not the actual spelling of the word, it's moving into the definition, right? So yes, it almost becomes more word recognition at that point, but also word usage. Can you use evaporation in a sentence, like while you're writing about this process of the water cycle, right? So once we get into or get through these types of words, we don't really want to focus on sight words so much anymore. We should have all of those words, and not even sight words, but we don't want to focus on specific word lists. We want to focus on these larger picture, the larger patterns, the larger word families that are going to actually trip up our students while they're spelling, all right? How many, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. How many of you remember struggling with spelling when you were in grade school? 2nd grade, 3rd grade, yeah, it sucks, right? Most of that happens, and it's unfortunately not a really easily solvable problem. We end up with lots of word lists, right? How many of you remember doing spelling lists as a kid? I very much remember that. And that doesn't teach you anything beyond the words on that list. The problem with the families, which teaches you how to respond to particular sounds, as we're going to see in a second, is what in English in particular? English sucks. English graphemically doesn't make any sense, right? For every rule, there's 25 exceptions, right? And there's oddballs, and there's non-phonetic spellings, and there's this and there's that. So teaching word families is only going to get you so far. So we get to this point where the only real way to learn to spell is through reading and making errors on reading, and then, oh, I didn't know that that's how you spelled through, and then memorizing it in that process. But there's not going to be any spelling list or any spelling assessment that is going to teach that it's going to ensure that you've got TH, OU, and GH, right? 3 digraphs in there for no apparent reason, effectively. Like that, it just doesn't exist. It's not, like, our language isn't built for this kind of black or white assessment. So when it comes to teaching and assessing spelling, we have to end up having this combination approach. All right. Is anyone? I'll find it. There's a really good example of that where there's a word that's put on the board that's, I don't know, maybe 30 letters long that that says a regular word, a noun, using all of the different variations, like an alternative variation for that sound throughout the word. I got it right. I was at a conference and I got it right. Everyone's staring at it for like 30 seconds and I just like, is that it? And it had the EAUX in there. So I thought that was funny. Anyway, so looking at spelling, sorry, yeah, let me jump ahead. No, I'll stay there. Okay, so specific words, we have word lists, right? Word lists turn into vocabulary lists. We can test families. Families are going to be more of a summative assessment, as we'll see in a second. For context and definition, which is really what we care about when it comes to spelling, given a given meaning, can you identify and or spell the correct word? Can you or use the correct grammatical version of the word? Can you use the right right thing? So for that, and this can be done as either a formative or a summative process, we have two procedures. One's called a closed procedure. The other is called a maze procedure. These are two procedures that were developed in the 70s. They're effectively the same thing, as you're going to see. And they are really looking for, can you identify appropriateness in context? All right. How do you do it? You start with a grade level passage or multiple passages from a given text. You remove one, maybe two words, critical words in a sentence. And in a closed procedure, you just leave it like that. And it's a fill in the blank type of assessment. In a maze procedure, you give three options. All right, one is correct. And then depending on what you are targeting, whether it be spelling or grammar, you are going to, your foils, your incorrect responses, are either going to be grammatically similar, the spelling's going to be similar, the sound's going to be similar, something along those lines. All right. So here, I know it's a little bit hard to see, is an example of a maze procedure. So you have the passage, it has the blanks. This one, I think, has more blanks than you would typically see on either a maze or a closed procedure. But it's very easily well done to illustrate what you do. So all the student does is read through the passage and circle or write in the correct word. All right, super simple. This is not going to, the type of spelling and grammar that this is going to address is very different than what your spelling test, your typical spelling test is going to address, right? This is going to look at spelling and grammar more as vocabulary than it is as just rote spelling. Between those two ideas, is one or the other more important? Is it more important that we recognize appropriate words in context? Or is it more important that we just purely be able to spell them on the spot? There's no, I'll tell you right now, there's no right or wrong answer. The right answer is probably both, but what do you guys think? Yeah.
My initial thought would be the context, because, and I hate to throw it out there, but realistically in the world we are today, autocorrect is always there.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something that we need to kind of adjust our instruction to as we go, right? When it comes to writing, 90% of the time we are writing electronically. We are going to have a fail-safe. We're going to have autocorrect. We're going to have something that's present to catch those mistakes, right? Has anyone looked at the app or the add-in Grammarly? Has anyone heard of that, seen that? Has anyone started using it? It's good, right? And that does this, you know? You chose a word that kind of works. Here's this one that's way better. And predictive text in Gmail, autocorrect in our texting. These are all things that honestly go off of this concept, and it's then up to us to kind of fill in the best word, right? So yeah, I think that being able to, I totally agree with you, Taylor. I think that being able to, as a general skill, being able to pick appropriateness in context is a more important skill than pure spelling or I don't want to say grammar skills, but pure spelling skills. Okay. The closed procedure, which allows, it's the exact same thing again, but without your multiple choice options underneath, does a little bit of both, right? So one, you actually have to spell the word right. It's not just given to you there. But two, you have to independently identify something that fits appropriately in that blank. Is one or the other of those better? Is one or the other of those better for different students? ELL students, English language learners, or ESL, right? A maze procedure might be a better assessment, where a closed procedure might be a better teaching tool, right? If you're trying to assess an expanded vocabulary, a closed procedure, maybe where you you adapt it a little bit and say, give 2 possible words, right? As a possible assessment. So I think there are different benefits in different scenarios for each of the different types of procedures. Overall, this is a very common procedure. It's a valid procedure, and it's an easy to administer procedure to identify spelling, grammar, definitions, and context. What about the much more traditional spelling definitions test? I give the word, you spell it, you give me the meaning. How useful is that? Is that useful? That was not a confident nod, Garrett. What do you guys think? From your own experience, from experience teaching? So just it's memorization of definitions of vocabulary. You couple spelling with vocabulary. Here is elephant. What does elephant mean? Here is square. What does square mean? Is there a difference between that process from the early elementary side to the later elementary side or middle school side? Once it becomes vocabulary, not just sight words, I think that there's a lot of benefit to that, right? But students have to have the vocabulary for the definition to be meaningful. If it's not there, then I don't think there's any point. If the students don't have the language for a definition to be meaningful, And I don't think having definitions as part of an ELA assessment is going to be meaningful either. It might be circle the word, circle what this is. That's, can you actually see the thing and know what it is? That to me has some benefit for earlier grades. But until your students have that language to really be able to use that definition and have that definition be meaningful to them, I don't think that there is much to that. When I was teaching my second graders, we started dictionary skills. And it was, here's your word, here's your spelling word. You've mastered spelling it. Now go find it in the dictionary and write the definition down. I didn't care if they actually understood what the definition was. What did I want them to do? I wanted them to learn the dictionary skill. I wanted them to learn the copying skill, the transcription skill. And I wanted them to be able to get exposed to the concept of a textbook definition. I wanted them to know that those words had specific meanings. Those are all prerequisite skills for third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, where you actually say, oh, I don't know what this word is. I'm going to go look it up and have that definition be actually meaningful. All right. So until you have the language to make those definitions meaningful, I think that something like the maze procedure or the close procedure gives you a much better idea if without being able to vocalize a definition, a child understands a definition. Okay, cool. All right, on the summative side of things, we have the same ideas. We can still look at sight words. We can still look at those specific words, those vocabulary words. We still look at word families. We look at definitions. We look at context. So we have all of those things still. And most of those procedures are done the same way. The one major exception is with word families. Okay. So with sight words, you're looking at a specific set of words, right? You're by the end of the year, you're going to have 100 words. We're going to assess you on all 100 words. Cool. With definitions and context, you're teaching that as a general idea, not necessarily specific ideas. And so your assessment is largely going to be the same. With word families, and I'm not sure, do you all know what I mean by word families? Words that have the same patterns of letters in them, all right? When it comes to word families, this is where we're talking about the larger spelling patterns that are seen throughout the language, right? It's not going to be possible to teach every single word out there in a specific list, whether that is a vocabulary, a sight word, or even in a word family list. So what we end up with are, there are certain curricula that have summative assessments like this. There are certain CVMs that address things like this, where they have a pretty big list of words. This goes on to an upper level as well. And in each word, I know it's a little hard to see back there, in each word, you're not actually measuring the correct spelling of the entire word. What you're measuring is the correct spelling of a particular sound. The sounds are broken up in difficulty. So if you have this is from a specific curriculum called Words Their Way. Anyone seen that before? No? Okay. I like this spelling curriculum. I don't like the activities. I like the sequence of this curriculum. We start with really easy beginning, beginning sound, middle sound, ending sound. We go into blends, then you go to syllables and affixes, then derived relations and the whole thing. So you move through words pretty quickly. given this list of words, we're measuring the different components, or focusing on the different components within each word. So switch has a digraph or a blend. Smudge has a digraph or a blend. Trapped does as well. Scraped does not. It has this end late, what do they call it? Complex consonant, right? Skr. So I'm not worried about that the same way I am with swa, sma, and chur, right? So I'm not measuring it until there. So you can get, excuse me, we end up looking at the whole word. Did you get the word spelled correctly? But we're focusing on did you get these individual features or parts spelled correctly? What's really nice about these types of assessments or these types of lists is if you fall apart in any given area, that tells you exactly where to go for your instruction. So as summative tests go, this assessment I found to be extremely useful for making decisions. This allowed you to go exactly where you were in the curriculum. All right. Now, this is built as a curriculum-based assessment. It comes with a curriculum. If you are in this within word pattern early area, you get a 0 down there. That's where you go in the curriculum. But it can also function as a CBM. So you have, if you have some other spelling assessment, there's no reason why this isn't applicable to words in general. All right. I know when I was growing up, I did not learn spelling in this way. I had lists of words. I remember that from kindergarten through 8th grade, right? When I taught this way, I really liked it up until a point. But when you start getting those combinations of letters that there's no way of knowing if it's EE or EA or whatever other or silent E on the end, this type of spelling didn't have, this type of assessment and instruction didn't have any way of guiding my instruction to how to discriminate between those different pieces. So I really struggled with that. The structure was good, definitely for the early learners. It got more and more challenging as spelling got more complex overall. All right. But as a summative assessment, this idea of word families and seeing where in general, where students are falling apart, I think was very, very helpful. Any questions about that? For most of these, when it comes to spelling and grammar, you guys are going to be in situations where they say, here's your ELA assessment, go ahead and give it, but know what you're looking for. Know what some of the different pieces of that you're looking for are, all right? So kind of to wrap up spelling and grammar overall, the goal is, the goal really needs to be to measure how useful, what is your level of comfort, what is your confidence in these spelling, these specific skills in context relative to any grade level, right? Like I said, I think the close and maze are better measures of really functional spelling and functional meanings. What they give you a better measure of is how fluent are you, how comfortable are you overall with this language repertoire? How automatic are these spellings for you? How automatic is, are your grammar usages for you? Can you use them in context? All right. There's nothing particularly fancy about spelling and grammar assessments. Dibbles, just as it's used for reading, is also going to be used for a lot of by a lot of schools to assess to conduct your closed or your maze procedures. Again, you'll have these assessments. You'll have a good curriculum, hopefully, that tells you exactly where you need to go, what you need to do. What's nice about spelling is at the end of the day, it's black and white. You either spelled it right or you didn't. So when it comes to giving feedback, when it comes to making those types of decisions, you have really concrete data to work with that makes it a lot easier. On the other side of that coin is writing, right? Writing is a lot more challenging for a number of reasons, right? Just like reading, as you go from learning to read this word, read this sentence, read this passage, what's the main idea, what's the main character, to bigger reading comprehension skills, analyze this, synthesize that. The same thing goes for writing. We start off really easy, sentence structure, individual words with spelling, as we just went over. But as soon as we have to put the bigger picture together, the objectivity of assessing writing goes out the window really, really quickly, all right? Anyone have to, I don't know if where they are right now in terms of writing in the ACT, SAT praxis. Do you still have to write essays for that?
Not for ACT.
Not for ACT? Okay.
ACT, you don't have to do writing.
Okay.
And on like PLT for practice, you have to do, there's a few essays.
Okay.
But it's not like writing, like where they give you like a.
What about AP tests? Anyone take AP tests?
Yeah.
Through those
AP
things.
test.
There's writing on there. I remember walking, whether it's the SAT, APs, I didn't take the ACT, but I remember it wasn't the practice, it was the New York State teaching assessments or teacher tests. I remember walking out of those, writing these essays. Most of the time I thought were pretty good. And just thinking like, how on earth does anybody score this? Like, how is this going to be evaluated in any way, shape, or form? And there's an answer to that. The answer is a rubric. But there's so much that goes into writing, and it gets so complex so quickly that there can't be any one way to objectively assess any large significant amount of writing, right? So the question is always going to be, how do we give a quality measure of writing? And I think the only way to do that is to break down what you are looking for and what you are evaluating in any given piece of writing, okay? A few ways to look at writing, and this is not exhaustive by any stretch, is writing just as itself. So how well can you put words together? Forget prompts, forget goals, forget stories, forget anything like that. Can you structurally put words together? Structure in a larger sense, not just sentences, but paragraphs, introductions, conclusions, supporting paragraphs, building characters, that type of thing. Style, fiction, nonfiction, tall tale, whatever genre you are working in, or function. And function is, when I talk about function here, I talk about effect on a reader, all right? When I ask that question about how many of you have miscommunicated in an email or text, that's functional writing, right? I had again, back in the second grade class, I had one kid who was by no fault of my own, a truly phenomenal writer. I don't know how, but he just got it. Like his vocabulary was well beyond second grade. It's probably a high school vocabulary. And he had an imagination, and he had a way of writing that was really, really special. And we were doing a free write or something. I don't know what it was. He wrote a few paragraphs as the start of a story, and I read it, and I told him that it was fantastic. I asked him if I could read it to the class, and he said yes. I brought the class around, and I said, I'm going to read this to you. You're not going to understand everything that it's talking about, and that's fine. But I want you to tell me how you feel afterwards. And I read it, and it was above most of their heads. And one of the kids raised his hand and said, I don't really understand why, but I want to cry. That function, that effect on a listener or a reader, that's the purpose of writing, right? Whether you're reading fiction, whether you're reading nonfiction, the purpose is to have this emotional effect or informational effect on a reader. And assessing how effectively you either communicate an idea or affect one emotionally, that's a really, really challenging thing to do. So what do? We measure the component parts of what we think it takes to get someone there. So do you have information? Do you back it up? Do you have characters? Do you develop characters? These are the different components that go into a rubric based on whatever it is that we're teaching at that time. On Thursday, we're going to dive more into rubrics. We're going to practice, hopefully, writing some rubrics and potentially scoring some examples of papers using rubrics, just to kind of see how that goes, all right? But what I want to do today for the remaining little period of class is talk about writing CBMs, or curriculum-based measurements. So remember, with curriculum-based measurement, this is a, not standard, but a easily generalized task that can be done multiple times throughout the year, that is detached from any specific curriculum and can measure just overall rote gains. Okay? So what a writing CBM is set to do is, in a relatively quick way, we want to be able to assess kids' overall writing abilities. Not understanding of genre, not structural writing, not stylistic writing, but just writing as a whole. How can we do that in a valid way that's easy to do, that's easy to score, that's easy to measure, all right? So I honestly don't know what it has been validated to, but these writing CBMs have become a quick way of doing that. So really quickly, does anyone have a piece of paper or something they can type on, or can share paper? Okay. So these are kind of like middle high school level writing prompts. And this is all you would give on a CBM, all right, a writing CBM. So you would do 3 of these to start to get your first data point, and take the mean score between the 3. But you would say pick one, or you would start with one. I'm telling you, pick one. We are going to write down the prompt that you want to do and just write for 3 to 5 minutes. All right, we're going to do 5 minutes. Okay. Okay. Pause the recording. Okay, so after 5 minutes, you are going to score your story in 3 different ways. So take a minute and, number 1, count up your total words written, correct or incorrect. Doesn't matter, just how many words do you write.
You said including the prompt or not including the prompt?
Oh, I didn't say, but don't include the prompt. Easier on your computer when you can just highlight. All right, so that becomes your first data point. I'll give you guys the benefit of the doubt being college students, and I'll assume that your total words written are your total words spelled correctly. But if that's not the case, go back and figure that out later. That's your second data point. The third data point is what's called correct writing sequences. This is a little bit harder to calculate. So a correct writing sequence is sequences of 2 consecutive accurate words. Accuracy is spelling, it's grammatically accurate, it's reasonable within American English, correct punctuation, correct capitalization. So the beginning of a sentence, if you start with she ran away, period. All right. So when I have, there you go. When I'm counting correct writing sequences, I'm going to put a caret each time there is a correct writing sequence of 2 words. All right. So I start off correctly. So I have a sequence here. So then with the first word, I have capital, and it's spelled correctly, and it's accurate. So that's my second. Then she ran is 2 words. Ran away is 2 words. Away, period, is 2 components. So this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I'm doing that right. Okay. If I said run, I lose that one. All right. If I had ran, I had a lowercase, my start would be wrong, and my capital was she would be wrong. So now I have 3. Okay. So I'm not going to ask you to do that now. And I'm actually, I have a descriptor page that has a lot more examples of how to score that I'll post on Moodle for you guys. But go back and see if you can calculate how accurate, how many correct spelling or correct writing sequences you have. All right. Don't need to turn in or anything, just for your own practice. But that's your writing CVM. All right. So you have 3 measures now. You have total words, words spelled correctly, and correct writing sequences that covers a wide swath of writing structure or writing overall, right? Doesn't look at style. I'm not looking at all at how well you stayed on the prompt. You could have gone off in some random direction, but as long as you got there in a grammatically and spelling appropriate way, you're still writing appropriately. So when we talk about how to look at writing, being able to look at and measure just writing ability, separate and apart from content, from form, from function, is important. We want to make sure that our children understand what goes into writing. That's step 1. On Thursday, we'll start to look into how to assess those other pieces through rubrics for step 2, 3, and 4. All right. Cool. Any questions? Okay. Have a good one. I'll see you on Thursday.